What's going on, guys? This is Aaron from Departures Capital. This video is brought to you on behalf of Military Metals, and we're here with Military Metals CEO Scott Eldridge. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing great, Aaron. How are you?
I'm great. Excited to be talking about this company. The antimony space is quite unique, and I feel like not a lot of people know as much about it. So very excited to be talking about that. So it's a pleasure to have you on. Can you start by telling us a bit more about yourself and Military Metals?
Right. So Military Metals is a publicly listed company on three exchanges, the CSE here in Canada, the OTCQB in the US, and then we're also listed in Frankfurt over in Germany. And we're a pure play antimony investment opportunity for investors that are looking for exposure to the rising antimony price. We have a solid management team, solid board, very well cashed up at the moment to execute on our plans. And we own 100% three different antimony-focused mineral projects in top mining jurisdictions, including Slovakia in the European Union, Nova Scotia in Canada, and Nevada in the United States.
Awesome. So let's talk about the critical role of antimony. So many people are unaware of how crucial antimony is for military applications. Can you highlight its key uses and why a secure supply is essential for defense operations?
Right. Well, I would say it's more than critical. It's paramount. Without antimony, modern defense, the industry itself can just not function. So believe it or not, antimony is actually used in 300 different munitions for the military. So that explains how important it is, and there's no alternative. Simply put, the military needs it. And the Western world, as it stands right now, is having a very hard time getting their hands on a stable, secure source. And there's an article from Forbes in 2024 that sort of sums up where we are right now in the critical mineral space and how reliant we are on China. And the title of that article says, "Double your money buying what China refuses to sell." And again, that sentence really sums it up in terms of where we are right now. Most people are aware that China recently banned exports of antimony, which was an escalation from a tariff to begin with. And the Western world has been so reliant on sourcing our antimony from China that we really haven't been exploring for this key mineral for the last several decades in North America because we were able to buy all we wanted from China. And now that China has turned off that tap and they're hoarding it for themselves, the Western world is in a panic in terms of where can we supply antimony from. And we saw that storm brewing as a group, and that's why we decided to put this pure play vehicle together going back over 6 months ago. And our predictions were definitely accurate. And you're probably aware that antimony was actually the top performing commodity for 2024, up almost 200%. And in the last 18 months, we've seen antimony rise from about $12,000 a ton to the current spot price, which I heard today is probably about $51,000 a ton. And there's no vision that that projectile upwards is not going to stop. So we're pretty excited about the space, and we have great shareholders that are very supportive of what we're doing.
Great. So let's talk about the supply chain crisis now. China recently banned antimony exports, sending prices soaring, with the Pentagon scrambling for alternative sources. How dire is the current situation, and what does this mean for Western defense capabilities?
Yeah, good question. So we're definitely in crisis mode here. Our mineral insecurity is absolutely in a crisis mode. The US is import reliant on 40 out of 50 critical minerals, and China is the leading supplier of 30 of those. So it's very important that the US and the Western world, being Canada and Europe, starts to foster these domestic projects because we need to break away from China and that significant reliance on these key critical minerals. We even call the critical minerals group that are highly concentrated on China a different name. We actually call them the advantage minerals. And to that, it means that China controls 50% or more of the mining and the refining of these metals. And that's basically the watch list of metals that if China turns off the tap, we're going to be in a very drastic situation for a whole suite of metals in addition to antimony. And that's why it's so important that these projects get developed within our own backyards.
So, Military Metals as a solution is one of the only publicly traded companies addressing this crisis. Can you share how your company is working to establish a secure, Western-controlled antimony supply chain?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that there's very, very few antimony pure plays out there in the market for investors to get exposure to this particular metal. And that's very important because there is no ETF where you can get exposure to rising antimony prices. There's no futures contracts because it's not exchange traded. So the only way to get direct exposure to the rising price is to buy a mining equity like ours. And between Canada and the ASX Australian exchange, you can count the top opportunities on one hand. It's a very, very limited space. And we wanted to target, as you said, projects that were in very friendly mining jurisdictions, Slovakia in the European Union, Nova Scotia in Canada, and Nevada in the US. So we therefore have a portfolio that's diversified across different geopolitical locations, and we can move all three of these projects forward at the same time. But our focus is definitely Slovakia in the European Union. And a lot of people would have seen in recent headlines, meetings with the European Union and NATO, where Europe is now going to be committing a much larger amount of capital to the defense sector. In years gone by, the measurement was that Europe would deploy about 2% of annual GDP to the defense sector. That's now increasing to 5%. So that means billions of dollars are being deployed into the European defense sector. And there will be an opportunity for us to try and fast track our Slovakian projects so we can hopefully feed European defense companies with that metal.
So let's talk about your Slovakia project. It holds over 60,000 tons of high-grade antimony, and you also have North American assets. Have you seen growing interest from governments or military agencies looking for domestic supply solutions?
Yes, we certainly have. And there's an interesting backdrop in Europe where there's a piece of legislation that was currently adopted called the Critical Raw Materials Act. And it's something similar to what we've seen in the US under the Inflation Reduction Act. But the purpose of both of those two pieces of legislation is to try and foster domestic mining projects to not be so reliant on China, that it's better to have a secure supply from your own backyard rather than being exposed to an unfriendly trade partner. So specifically in Slovakia, there's a fast track permitting process for all European Union countries that host these critical minerals projects. And it actually states that you have to receive the mining and the environmental permit within 2 years, which is music to our ears because we know we can fast track this project that's already had a significant amount of capital invested into it. This was actually meant to be a mine in the late 80s, early 90s. But when the Cold War ended in Europe in 1992, there was no longer that demand for antimony. So we know that there's a very high grade, well-defined Soviet era resource here. You mentioned it has 60,000 tons of antimony in the ground in situ. At today's spot prices, that represents about $3 billion worth of metal. And what we're doing right now is the necessary confirmation work with a third-party resource firm to bring that Soviet era resource up to a National Instrument 43101 resource. So that'll be coming out in the next few months. And what originally attracted us to this project was not just the location and the fact that it had a historical resource on it of size, it's the grade. It actually has 2.5% antimony as the average grade, with a 0.6 gram per ton gold byproduct to it. So that makes this Europe's largest untapped antimony resource. And it also competes on a global scale as one of the largest undeveloped antimony deposits that we hope to advance.
Awesome. So now let's talk, about investment opportunities. So with antimony prices rising in Western nations desperate for a stable supply, why do you believe military metals presents an early stage investment opportunity that the market has yet to fully recognize?
Right. So we've got about a 35 million market cap. So I would argue that there's definitely upside as we invest time and capital into the projects to unlock that, again, in situ value of about $3 billion. But again, we have a diversified portfolio. We're in 3 top mining jurisdictions, and we're seeing a lot of government support, not just from a permitting perspective to move these quicker, but we're also starting to see government capital being deployed directly into moving these assets forward quicker. So we're seeing in the US, the Department of Defense becoming more active in terms of grants, equity, project finance loans. we have access to that same capital in Europe, which could very well be non-dilutive financing to our shareholders. So it's wonderful to see, basically a dynamic here. We're seeing a paradigm shift where discovery to production in the mining space used to be 20 years, and investors would shy away from that lengthy timeline. But now we can actually do things within a few years to advance projects very quickly. So we're definitely seeing governments adopting a strong sense of urgency from a permitting and from a financial perspective.
Definitely exciting times in the critical metal space. So it's been a pleasure covering the company and learning more about antimony. It's still something I don't know that much about, but very exciting. So best of luck. I know you got a lot coming, so I look forward to having you back on in the future.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be here. It's a busy time. We're just getting ready for PDAC. Lots of meetings and interest lined up over there. So yeah, I would definitely encourage people to follow what we're doing. There'll be a lot of news flow coming out over the next few months.